So this is the first category, data collection. As you can all see on your P2 checklist, right here is data collection. Okay, so when we go to a brewery, the first thing we ask, are you tracking energy, water, waste generation rates, and inventory? Generally, every brewery tracks four of these. The one that breweries have trouble tracking is wastewater. So a lot of times wastewater will require a submeter on some of their process lines so they can track what they're sending to their wastewater treatment plant. So generally we get four check marks here unless they have a submeter. Once we ask them about that, we ask them and take a look at the environmental planning. Um, so if a brewery has standard operating procedures, if a brewery has best management practices, then this is considered environmental planning. Joe, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So this is basically the picture on the right is at a brewery that has standard operating procedures for everything. So you can see they have little SOP binders all over their breweries, which are really beneficial because, like I said before, it allows you to track the maintenance, track scheduled like filter changes on your HVAC, come up with protocols for lighting, temperatures of the brewery. Basically, it keeps the brewery running at an efficient method. So, like I said, tracking wastewater isn't very common. And if a brewery doesn't currently have standard operating procedures, or if they're not tracking their maintenance, then we have what's called an environmental plan template. The environmental plan template is something that I shared with everyone who had registered by yesterday. The environmental plan template, here's the table of contents. You can give this to your brewery to fill out, and it helps them actually track their processes and some of their procedures. Joe, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the process line inspection and the plumbing inspection pages. This environmental plan template is just really useful and it's very simple for them to fill out. On the checklist, you'll notice this is worth a lot of check marks. And this is really beneficial to just hook to a clipboard and put near, like if it's for the HVAC maintenance, then just put a clipboard right next to the HVAC so people who work at the brewery have easy access to the documents. This has gone over really well for us. Also, you'll notice on the data collection section um, that under annual assessment, you will see there's an internal or external assessment to be conducted. Basically, what we do is we count our visit as this assessment. So we give them a check mark for allowing us to be there. We like to see this done about once a year, but it's wholly up to you when you implement your own program how often you want an annual assessment. It really helps you get back in the door to the brewery if you do it once a year to check on anything new that they've implemented. Also, right under that is the water to beer ratio. This is a really interesting topic. So water to beer ratios, basically, in the United States, a craft brewery, generally it's a 7 to 10 barrels of water to 1 barrel of beer, or you can go by gallons or whatever. But this is the average throughout the United States is 7 to 10 barrels per 1 barrel of beer. So we like to know that breweries are monitoring this and that they know about it and that they understand how much water they're actually using because water is one of the resources most intensely used at breweries, as we all know. So the interesting thing about monitoring this is if you don't have any submeters measuring the amount of water that goes into your brewing process, and you're just going by your utility bill, your water bill, then your water to beer ratio is going to be really skewed to make it look like you're using way more water than you are. And this is the only way a lot of breweries are monitoring water to beer ratio. And it's not super accurate, at least it's a start. There are multiple ways to measure water to beer, and there's no standard. So we've been looking for a standard that all breweries use throughout the United States, and there is just not one. There are more arduous, difficult ways to measure water to beer ratio, and that method is to measure water loss at every stage of the brewing process through evaporation, and other various ways in which breweries lose water. Sometimes breweries will lose water when it's sitting in a keg and it's leaking out or it's evaporating through the keg. So it just depends on you how you want breweries to measure water to beer ratio. We find it's easiest to just kind of allow them to figure out how they're going to do it because, like I said, there is no standard. I had a brewery reach out and ask how to measure it. I wrote a very long example of measuring water loss through each step of the process, and I think it was way too much for them. So it's totally up to you how you want to have breweries measure this. And so with data collection, um, we'll move into energy efficiency. This is the next part of the checklist. And I am going to hand this section over to Joe.
Thank you. So with energy efficiency, what we really do is we just want to look at we go through and we want to just take a look at every place, every spot along the entire brewing process, but also throughout the entire business itself. You know, while we do spend a lot of the time in the back of house in the brew house part of this, we're also taking a look at the entire location. So whether that's if they have a kitchen, if they have their tap room, we're trying to make this comprehensive, and this checklist kind of crosses all of those marks. But when it comes to energy efficiency, one of the things that we like to look at towards the beginning of it is just looking at all their process lines and plumbing and piping and making sure A, they're in good repair, B, if it should be insulated, that the insulation is there and good repair and there's no leaks or anything. Right here in the video, you can see Jenny's working with the head brewer and checking out all of the glycol cooling lines that are running into all their jacketed fermenters along there to make sure that there are no leaks in the glycol lines. There are no, that all the insulation is in good repair because anytime you have a lack of insulation on those, you have potential, excuse me, energy loss. Um, Another thing that we'll walk through and make sure we take a look at is their HVAC system, throughout the brewery to make sure, A, we're checking to see do they have a newer, higher efficiency system in place. We're going to take a look at the ductwork, make sure that there's not many, gaping holes and spots free of debris and spots that can leak air through the HVAC system. We want to make sure that they do have a filter schedule in place, whether they contract that out to someone or they have one there. It's one of those things that really should be documented, so you do know when the filters are changed and regular to keep the optimum efficiency running of their HVAC system. And then the other one we usually end up having to laugh about is looking at thermostats. Um, Almost every brewery we've worked with does have a programmable thermostat. The next question is it actually programmed? You'd be shocked how often they spend the money, they have a programmable thermostat, and then they just set it to run at the same temperature no matter what. Um, we've found that happens quite regularly. So we'll sit down with them and just go through the process of let's get this thing programmed. What are your business hours? What do you want? How do we do this? And get it through so they're actually running, using the thermostat with all of the capabilities of what it has to optimize their efficiency and lower their energy consumption. An area where a lot of energy can be lost is in the chillers and coolers. They are some of the higher consumers of energy that run overall. So we check for plastic strip curtains, insulated doors, make sure there's not cold, just cold air leaking out of the coolers. And then the other thing we'll do is we'll work with them to help source if they can find, plastic strip curtains, and we'll look at their local utility provider to see if there are any rebates available. A lot of times we've found, whether it's a local utility or an investor-owned utility, or a public, private, or any of these, there will be rebates available for small businesses to implement various efficiency projects, such as installing of strip curtains. And that's one we found pretty commonly across both larger utility providers as well as, small municipalities and co-ops. Um, Another, it seems simple, but is extremely effective, is using heat from the brewing process, especially during the winter times here in the Midwest, to help heat the brew house. So what, example here in this video, you see a very large fan that they can, it's a reversible fan. So during the winter months, they can try to suck the heat up that's generated because the brew house is actually down in the basement level of this, and they have an open area, so they can pull the heat up through that fan, using that fan to help heat the tap room. And then in the summertime, when they want to try to keep it cooler, they can use that, push it out, and they have a door out the back that they can then try to push that hot air out, so it isn't coming up and heating up the brew house or the tap room, excuse me, as significantly. And then when we're talking about looking at the process again, looking at the mash tuns, the boil kettles, and things like that, looking at the equipment that they have themselves. And I know Jenny does a lot of this research on it, and she can talk a little bit more into how this kind of works, what we do with
Sure,
this.
sure. So when we go into a brewery, we take a look at the brands of equipment that they're using, and when we get back to the office, we look them up to see how efficient they are. Textile Brewing, which is this video is from, they use Blickman Pro Series mash tuns. And Blickman, so I got back to the office and looked it up. These are highly efficient mash tons, and they're dual walled and insulated. They retain temperature for extended amounts of time. They provide minimal heat loss, and they also save the brewery money. So we do take a look at equipment. We'll jot down what they have, come back to the office, and then just look up the equipment to see how efficient it is, to see if it's Energy Star rated sometimes. We also do this when we get to the water quality section. We do this with some of the water equipment. So yeah, it's a great idea just to jot down what they're using and see how efficient it is, and then give them points for some of their equipment. Yeah, renewable energy is a big one. So you take a look at this brewery textile. First, I got to say, textile is in Dyersville, Iowa. And many years ago, it was an old sewing factory. They used to sew ladies' nightgowns. And so when they first bought the building, it was full of all kinds of sewing equipment. And they renovated the building, and they put an entire array of solar panels on the top of the building. So renewable energy is great. There's 2 points on the checklist. One is for implementing renewable energy, and one is for purchasing renewable energy credits through your utility company. So this particular brewery has had renewable energy, the solar panels on their building since 2022. And they can track basically the CO2 emissions prevented. Currently, this particular brewery has prevented 385,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And the miles driven on sunshine, which is a really cool way to say it, with a solar array, is 437,000 miles driven on sunshine. So this is really, really valuable to us when we see these solar panels or a brewery that purchases renewable energy credits.
And then a couple of other things we do, and I see Raina had a question about how are we testing the CO2 lines for leaks, and I'll gladly talk about that right now. So that is one of the things that we do. We do have an ultrasonic CO2 leak detector that we bought. It was about $500. It's just an AccuTools model is the one that we have. And so you calibrate it at ambient, and then you can take it and it kind of sniffs through all of and what we'll do is especially in the coolers, along all of the tap lines that are coming out of kegs, or if they have them in the bright tanks, and we'll start usually right at the CO2 tank, and then we'll check all fittings, all areas, all all of the couplings and fittings along the way, and test for leaks. CO2 ends up becoming a pretty big expense, especially for the smaller breweries. So if there's anytime we can identify a leak and help get that sealed up and figured out, it can save them quite a bit of money, and time and the amount of CO2. Some of the other things that we look for and recommend is looking at all the doors and windows, checking if they're, Energy Star rated, are they the double pane and gas and gassed windows? Um, are all of their bulbs, like I mentioned earlier, have they upgraded to LED bulbs? You can see in this picture here that again, this is at Textile Brewing. They have all these old fixtures, parts that were in the old sewing factory, but they found a local craftsman that can take a lot of these parts and turn them into chandeliers, lights. But then they also make sure that they install high efficiency LED bulbs across the board in everything that they've done.
Okay, water quality and conservation. So we already talked about water to beer ratio. I just want to point out the picture on this slide is what's called an infuser. So this infuser is amazing. It is a very expensive piece of equipment that a brewery had the capital to purchase. And basically, what this piece of equipment does is it vastly reduces the amount of water and the amount of ingredients used in the brewing process. It also reduces the amount of time. So basically, it just circulates water around, and it picks up the flavors from the hops and whatever other ingredients they have there. It just picks up the flavor quicker, so uses less water and it uses less ingredients and saves them quite a bit of money. So that's just an infuser. An infuser is not on our list because not every brewery can afford to purchase an infuser, but it is worth a check mark. When we get to the end of today's webinar, you'll see we do have a section for discretionary points. So anyway, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, one of the things also on the list are taking a look at cleaning chemicals. We give checkpoints if breweries buy cleaning chemicals in bulk to help reduce the amount of packaging headed to the landfill. We also take a look at what cleaning chemicals they're using and whether or not they're rated environmentally friendly or neutral. There is a brewery cleaning chemical company called Burco that has an environmentally neutral, and they used to have an environmentally friendly line, but I don't think they call it that anymore. So when a brewery uses those kind of cleaning chemicals, we give them a checklist simply because they're safer for the environment than traditional cleaning chemicals. So that's important too. You see this big tank back here is their CO2 tank. We also, as Joe mentioned, will check that for leaks as well with our CO2 leak detector. Next slide, Joe. Oops. You're on mute. Oops. This is the next one.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
It
Okay. No,
froze there on me for a
that's
second.
okay. It's all the videos, I'm sure. Okay, so also in the water quality section, we do take a look at pre-rinse spray valves and aerators on all faucets. This includes the kitchens, the brew house, and the restroom. So we just want to make sure that they're using less water, and aerators are super cheap. So if you wanted to even bring aerators along to a brewery audit and give a few to a brewery, just to kind of start them out with using less water. That would be a really inexpensive way to help them. Also, notice in this picture, we were talking about SOPs and data collection and standard or best management practices. You'll see right here is a clipboard in the forefront of the image. That's just a handwritten SOP. We count those. So, love this brewery, by the way. I'll let Joe talk about this one.
So, one of the other things we look at, like Jenny's mentioned, brewing beer is a very water intensive process. You use a lot of water just to make the beer. And then you have to, bring the temperatures down, and it takes a lot of water to run through the heat exchange to get the wort down to temperature really in a quick enough time so that you can pitch the yeast into it. So one of the things we really want to look at is, are they reusing that process water, and how are they reusing it, and are there ways that they could reuse it even more? So what we like to see and what we recommend is any of that heat exchange water that's coming off the hot water. If you have a hot liquor tank, store it in there, so you can use it for your next batch that you're going to make. That way, you're not having to heat that batch up nearly as long as you would if you were using tap water. When you get to the point where the hot liquor tank may be full, then you can reuse that water for cleaning. Cleaning and sanitation is very important with the brewing process to prevent the beers from going bad. So making sure that you have clean and sanitized equipment is vital. So if you can reuse some of that water, because literally it is just tap water that's been run through the heat exchange system and through the pipes to come out, and it's coming out hot on the other side. So it's virtually the tap water that's coming out, just run through that process. It hasn't been introduced to anything else. So if you can reuse that water in any way possible, I highly, highly recommend that. We've worked with the brewery before that, their head brewer was adamant we can't reuse that water in our in our beer because it's not what we want. It's not the exact. And then they finally made the switch and did it, and it had zero impact on flavor, on output, on anything that they did. And they started saving about $200 a month on their water bill, just by simply filling up their hot liquor tank, reusing it there. Another thing that we've seen, which this is a picture of, is creating a closed loop system for the heat exchange. So this particular brewery, they had a handful of tanks they had a handful of tanks and a pallet jack where they would run they would put one of these totes into their cooler where they had some extra space in their cooler, with ambient temp water in there. It would cool down. They would run that through the heat exchange unit, which would then actually drop the temperature quicker because they were using a colder water than just tap water because it was in their cooler. And then through the backside of it, they would load it into the tote next to the tank that you see here. And then once that water got back down to ambient temp, they'd bring it into the cooler, bring the empty one that they had just used from the cooler out, and redo the process. So they were able to reuse their water for their heat exchange over and over and over again and generate zero wastewater out of that process.
Okay, last section, resources and solid waste management. So people always ask us about spent grain, and spent grain is a great way for farmers to use spent grain and take it to other uses, basically. Spent reuse of spent grain is not on this list because this is a P2 list. But if you want to add spent grain, you sure can. In Iowa, we don't have any sort of problem with breweries getting rid of their spent grain. There's always enough farmers willing to pick up the spent grain. We have heard in big cities it's a problem because farmers really don't enjoy driving into big cities to pick up spent grain. But in Iowa, it's been very, very easy. The only issue is having a farmer pick it up on a reliable schedule. That's the only issue we've seen. So spent grain is not currently on this list because it's not considered a P2 practice, but if you want to add it, you sure can. Um, so we will start digging into the other P2 pollution prevention strategies. One of the really big ones that you're going to see at so many breweries, like I don't think we've ever walked into a brewery and not seen reclaimed materials. This brewery, Textile Brewing, has so many reclaimed materials that they get a check mark for this. Um, as you can see in the image on the right, they took an old fan that was in the sewing factory and they turned it into a light fixture. Um, the image on the left, the entire bar is reclaimed and salvaged materials. The wood from the bar was actually a part of the sewing factory as well. So we see this everywhere at breweries. If you were to look around this brewery, every table has a light fixture on it, and they're made out of like old sewing machines, and it's just really neat to see what breweries come up with for reclaimed and salvaged materials. The picture on the right also has the old time clock that was used for people to punch in, and this is just a really decorative feature for them and it looks cool too. Love the reclaimed materials part. Also, we want breweries to use post-consumer products or recycled products. So we take a look at toilet paper, we take a look at napkins, paper towels to see if it has that post-consumer logo on it. We also look at grain bags. When we first started this project or this program quite a few years ago, grain bags were all made out of plastic, and most breweries had no way to recycle them. They ended up in the landfill. What we've seen since then, what we've started to see around Iowa is breweries that really do care about environmental stewardship have started to purchase grain bags in that are paper rather than the plastic that can be recycled. So, having talking to a brewery about the possibility of getting paper in their grain bags or getting a grain silo outside if they're making lots of barrels of beer, if that would be sustainable and financially feasible for them, that's also a great idea to limit the amount of waste going to the landfill. We also take a look at recyclable or reusable packaging. So crowlers, a lot of breweries will use crowlers, and if those can be recycled, that's awesome. If they can't, then we would hope that they could use something that is recyclable or reusable. Growlers are amazing because everyone reuses those over and over and over again, hopefully. So we do also look at that. Okay, as you noticed, we didn't go through everything on the checklist because a lot of it's pretty self-explanatory. Um, at the bottom of the checklist, we also have discretionary strategies. So this will allow you the opportunity to give people a check mark for something that's not on the list. For example, spent grains to farmers would be a good one. We've seen a brewery that actually has a pollinator garden all around the brewery, and that really limits the mowing. So they don't actually have to mow that area, which also reduces the amount of waste, the amount of fuel that's used, and maintenance for a mower. We've seen a lot of local ingredients be used. There was one brewery that was harvesting yeast from a lake in their town and making beer out of it. Another brewery was capturing butterflies and was taking pollen off of the butterflies to make beer using that pollen, and the butterflies were not harmed. So if you see some cool strategies, this is an opportunity for you to give them check marks for strategies that aren't currently on the list. And of course, this is the very basic P2 list for breweries. So if you want to add to it, go ahead. There's a lot of really cool things that you're going to see at breweries that aren't on the list, but since it's simply a P2 list, this is a great place to start for like if you want a P2 grant, you want to apply for a P2 grant, this P2 list would really um, cater to the P2 program. So I love the discretionary points. And if you look at the checklist, so this is, as I said before, there are a minimum of 42 strategies required for certification. We were like a little bit struggling to figure out how to explain this, but there are four sections: data collection, energy efficiency, water quality and conservation, and resources and solid waste management. And so we would like 60% of the strategies to be obtained in each of those four categories, and then an additional seven elective strategies from any of the categories for a total of 75% of the strategies achieved. So in order to get certification, for a minimum of 42 is required. As you noticed also in the email that I sent to you yesterday with all of the resources attached to it, we also include the logos. These logos are copyrighted, so they can't really be changed, but on the forms, there is a customizable little button where you can add your logo or you can add your state to the forms as well. And Joe created those forms, so if you want to talk to that really quick. Was that the checklist, I believe, and the environmental plan template?
Yeah, so we do we created those forms to follow the environmental plan template goes right alongside all of the environmental planning things within the checklist. The recommendations report that plugs through goes directly through that. So what you can do with the recommendations report, it really has made it kind of very simple to plug and play as you go through, you make all the check marks that you have on the that when you've gone through the initial audit. And then when you come back to the office, you can take a look at that, and then you look at the recommendations report template, and anything that's unchecked, you can pull that out and put it right into that recommendations report. And you can obviously expand on it, but it's going to give you a basis of this is what you need to do to achieve these check boxes. And so then you can take that, do it, and then it's customized right away specifically for the brewery with all of the options available.
It makes it very simple. You just basically plug and play. You delete what you don't want and save what they haven't achieved yet, and then send them a quick recommendations report. It's awesome.
So, yeah, I guess right now if we'd be open for any questions, if you want to use the Q&A, that way we can document them. If anybody has any questions, we would love to answer them for you.
Also, while we're waiting for questions to roll in, I just have to say, if any of you are interested in implementing a brewery program this using this P2 checklist, we really want to know about your success and some of the challenges. And we're going to write up some case studies about your work. We would also like to know about anything innovative, any processes that are innovative or equipment that's innovative that you've seen at breweries. We also want to record some video about those strategies that you've seen. And if you just have any questions at all, if you need any sort of guidance or you have any questions at all, we are open. We would love to hear from you.
So first question is asking, do breweries oftentimes already meet the minimum requirements for certification at the initial audit? I'm just kind of curious if we have, how often we have to tell them they can't certify. Um, Honestly, I would say it's probably well under 50% that after the initial audit, already qualify, for certification. Um, so we will work with them hand in hand. What we've developed here in Iowa with our initial program, we do have tiers of certification: bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. And so we'll walk them through that if what level they want to achieve. But to get to certification, usually we have to recommend some implementation, and really a lot of it comes down to the kind of environmental planning, standard operating procedures, making sure they're documented, and then some of the energy efficiency stuff. Those are a lot of the things that we usually will work with them initially to get them up to the certification point. Um, Next question was, how do we manage guidance and recommendations with hands-on assistance? So, Jenny, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. When we go into a brewery, if there are any sort of questions for us that aren't a part of the certification, we come back to the office, we do the research, and then we reach out to them and let them know what we found. There's a brewery in Des Moines called Exile Brewing, and they're in a very old building. They had some windows really high up that weren't really used for seeing out, but they did provide some natural light into the brewery. And they had lots of cold air coming into the building, but it was a historic building, so they didn't want to replace the windows. So they're like, what can we do? So we came back to the office and did some research and found these really neat windows that just slide into an existing window that reduce the drafts, reduce the amount of cold air that's coming in or warm air that's getting out. We also had another brewery that was using a very, very old refrigerator that had a retro vibe to it that they didn't want to get rid of because it matched their decor. So we came back to the office and looked for someone who could retrograde that refrigerator for them and sent them that contact information. So basically, we just track any additional assistance that a brewery needs. And when we get back to the office, we do the research. And when we send them the recommendations report, we send them that information, or we wait until we actually go to the brewery to certify them. So it's really nice to get some of the questions because there's a lot of things we don't think about when we're in a brewery that we've never seen before.
Another question asking, is CO2 recovery or reuse common? No, it is not. There's kind of two instances. Um, there are kind of two instances where we see it. One, very larger, much larger scale breweries that do have the capital budget to invest in a CO2 recovery system, and that can see a return on that investment because their production is at a level where it's generating enough CO2 that it's worth recapturing and compressing down. The other thing we've seen is with much smaller breweries, and this is there's one down in the Quad Cities here in Iowa that does this, and it's the owner brewer doesn't think it's anything spectacular, but he has a slightly larger fermenter. What couple of his fermenters are slightly larger than they probably need to be for what he has with the rest of his system, and they're rated up to a high enough pressure that he actually just runs a line from the top of that fermenter and uses the CO2 generated from the fermentation to supply his tap handles with CO2, so he doesn't have to hook up the bulk CO2 or the canistered CO2 up to his tap lines. And so that's a kind of a very unique way that we don't see a lot of breweries doing that, but it's a way that a smaller brewery can actually capture and reuse um, carbon dioxide in the process. Um, had a question that can you mention top three pollution prevention practices?
Hmm. I would say LED lights is one of them. We rarely go into a brewery and see the old light bulbs with mercury in them. Most of them have already switched to LED lighting. Spent grain is another one, but that's not a P2 practice, so I won't go there. Joe, what do you think another one is that's common?
The CO2 leaks, checking for
Uh,
CO2 leaks. That's a big one. There's those leaks are small. You can't smell them. They could potentially become a worker safety hazard. So that's an important thing. But CO2 it becomes a big expense, especially for the smaller breweries. They use a lot of it. It's needed throughout the entire process, and being able to do that is fairly significant. Then I guess
oh,
another one. Oh,
I would
Oh, go ahead.
I would say reuse of processed water is a third one. We
Hmm.
hardly ever, I mean, a brewery at a minimum is going to be reusing processed water for cleaning at a minimum. I don't think there's ever been a brewery that wasn't, except for maybe textile, but we've talked them into now they use the water for brewing. So,
Hmm. And so got another one just mentioning that seems like checklist is intentionally vague in some cases, and a lot of it I would agree with that, especially in the documentation. because documentation and standardization and having operating procedures is a lot of what we have within there, and within that is meant to be, because if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. If you're documenting it and you're recording it on a monthly or weekly or whatever basis, then it's not it's in your forefront. You're thinking about it, you're monitoring it, you're using it. It's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It's not just the bill that you pay every month. It's something that you're actually looking at and monitoring and seeing where it's coming. And then you can look back in the process. If you do notice something's different and something changed, you can look back. Why is that? Um, and so in there, you said like is the intention that compliance is 100% for all equipment types or 100% for processed water used for cleaning. Um, the goal is that they're doing it, because there are times when we have walked into a brewery where they just didn't think about it and they were running their all of their heat exchange right down the drain, and it's like, well, at least use it for cleaning. You can use it for this. It's but they just don't think of it, because all they're thinking of, the head brewer, he's thinking about making beer and making sure that beer is the top quality beer that tastes the best for the customers there. They're not necessarily thinking about what's coming out of the back end of that heat exchange. So by bringing that up and making sure that they're aware of it and how much they're using, then we can really work on them on processes that can help reduce that amount.
And I want to add to that too, is we had a question I think it was last week. Someone asked us, what about breweries that don't have food versus breweries that do have food? Like, how does this checklist work for each of them? And I will say that this checklist works for both breweries that have food and breweries that don't have food, because we're looking at equipment, we're looking at processes, we're not looking at like the food section per se different as the brewery production section of the restaurant. So it works equally for breweries that have food versus breweries that don't have food. And this checklist really works well for larger breweries and smaller breweries. And that was something that we worked really, really hard on when we first developed this program, was to make sure that large breweries don't have a benefit over small breweries or vice versa. So when talking about like how vague it is, we just tried to make it fit for different scenarios.
Question asking what qualifies as high efficiency for toilets or pollution prevention in bathroom sinks. We look for water wise. We look for gallons per minute on flush. We look bathroom sinks to make sure there are aerators installed on all bathroom sinks. Motion sinks sometimes, but we've also found instances where that's been, you know, uh, found to be less impactful than people actually turning off the faucets. In certain instances, we had one brewery that put the motion sensor sinks and they noticed their water consumption go way up. So they actually uninstalled those and put your traditional hand managed sinks on there
Yeah.
um, within that. But we've seen it the other way around as well. A lot of that is kind of case by case there.
And a lot of
Um,
times, if a brewery has new equipment, it's going to be more efficient versus if it's an old toilet that doesn't have the water sense label on it.
mhm. And so that other couple of questions that's kind of tie hand in hand is what are the incentives to participate? Is it just because the consumers prefer a green brewery? Grant program, what other strategies do we use to get breweries interested in working with us and what benefits do they see? Um, I can start on that a little bit. When we first launched the program and initiated it, the one of the bigger draws was the marketing aspect of it. It was in the boom during the beginning boom of craft brewing here in Iowa. When we first started the program, like Jenny mentioned, we surveyed 14 breweries across the state. I think there were only 36 maybe in the state at the time. There's well over 100 now. There was some massive growth, so the marketing aspect of it helped provide a differentiator amongst other competitors. It was something that was a bragging point. Craft brewing consumers are a consumer group that does seem to care, and that's been acknowledged. We have an economist here that's worked with some other professors and economists at other universities to look at kind of attitudes towards sustainability within brewing and found that, that there does seem to be a correlation there between craft brewing consumers and their perceptions of sustainability and that being something that's important to them. But what we've seen more recently, as we've seen this, the industry kind of plateau and really struggle in these last few years is they're looking at it twofold. One, there's still the marketing aspect of it, but really it's the business operation side. And how can we become more efficient and save every penny that we possibly can because margins are razor thin. Competitive advantages are tough to come by. You're competing with massive international conglomerates for shelf space if you're distributing. So any of these little things that really is part of the incentive. And lately we've seen that really focus more on the operational benefit of implementing what we're doing, just as much as the marketing side of it.
Actually, webinar number 4 digs into incentivizing breweries. So that'll be coming up in a couple of months. Webinar number 3, this is the second webinar. Webinar number 3 is going to talk all about P2 data collection, analysis, reporting, and recommendations reports for breweries. And then webinar number 4 will dig into the incentivizing breweries to participate because we have learned a lot in that avenue and have some great recommendations for that.
I have another question here that's asking, are breweries generally able to empty their kettles completely when they're bottling or canning and filling, or their residual beer remaining that ends up getting flushed to the drain? A lot of times, depending on the process, if they're bottling or canning, there's always going to be some waste that's involved with that due to tolerances and requirements for that process. Really minimizing that is very important to them, and so they do that. The on the other side of it, and during the actual brewing process, there really isn't a whole lot. They're trying to extract as much as they can. We do look at, do they have filters in the bottom to help keep the sediments down so they can lower that? And then even outside of that, do they have a grease or a sediment trap um, within their wastewater floor drains and whatnot there to help minimize the amount of potential solids going into that? Anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's great. We have seen some breweries that filter their tanks before they get rid of the wastewater. And we also have breweries, and usually it's a municipal mandate, breweries that have grease traps in their floor drains. So that is also not considered P2, but could be a part of a discretionary point, or you could add it to the water section.
And then for the tracking sesh,
Harley's got her hand raised.
oh, okay. So yes, Harley can't, that their Wi-Fi went out. Sorry,
Oh.
Harley. That could happen. I will here, and I've actually brought Harley in here as potentially able to talk because she is down in Missouri and they've implemented and actually certified 3 breweries in their area. So I don't know if her
Can you
Wi-Fi went
guys
back up. Yes,
can
we
you guys
can hear.
hear
So
me?
yeah, so you can talk, if you can talk a little bit, just kind of how you've implemented it there
Yeah,
with some of these.
absolutely. So we started ours 2 years ago, and we started certifying brewers local to where we are housed here in Springfield, Missouri. We started with 4x4. They have a fairly new facility out in Fremont Hills here. They partnered with Paul Mueller, who installed all of their brew house and kegs and things like that. So it was nice to walk into a facility that had new and shiny equipment and then see what they were able to implement. And they scored very high up on their benchmarks right away. And they also had a very low water to beer ratio. So that was interesting to see. We recently certified transparent brewing out of Grandview, Missouri. And then right after that, we did Urban Chestnut, which is a fairly large brewery out in St. Louis. And that one, all of their equipment is directly imported from Germany. So that was also interesting to see the way that the brew house was designed based off of that as well. It's been A lot of trial and error getting the program running, and then our benchmarks, obviously they're not the same, and there's things that are in there that are equal to yours or different. So we've been able to trial and error eliminate and add things as we go as well.
Perfect. And one thing also we're doing for breweries, for technical assistance providers that implement this program is we have on our website a GIS map that all you have to do is send us your breweries and we will add them to this GIS map that you can then host on your own website or link to your own website. So if you hop on our website, you'll be able to see the GIS map, and we have all of Missouri's breweries added to it already. So if any of you implement a brewery project and you want a GIS map of all of your certified breweries, we'd be happy to work on it for you.
One other question is just on the tracking section. Do they provide us with data or just confirm that they track? We initially check to confirm that they are tracking and that they have it and it's done there. And then in some instances, we don't do it as much anymore. But at one point, we would have an intern on staff, and this is something we may get back into. We would hire a student intern here at the University of Northern Iowa. Um, and at the time, there was a sustainability person at the National Brewers Association, and they had their sustainability benchmarking tools accessible and readily available for any BA members to enter in, and so that way they could compare. And so we would have our student intern enter that data for any brewery interested in that. Since then, the BAs changed the way that some of their benchmarking tools are done and available, and so we don't do that right now, but it's something that we've looked at continuing to maybe continue on in the future. And I think that is all of the questions that we have so far. Are there any more? I'll give maybe another minute or two for anybody else with a question.
And we'll be reaching out to let you know about the next webinar. We'll be covering, like I said, data collection, recommendations, reports, and getting that environmental plan template filled out. Just basically the paperwork part. And the fourth webinar will be how to incentivize breweries to participate in your program. This slide is all about the benefits we will be providing you. So if there's anything you need help with, please just zip me or Joe an email at iamjennifer.trent@uni.edu, and Joe is mjbolick@uni.edu, or hop on our website. You can leave us a message there too.
And I see no more questions.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you. And we hope to hear from you soon. And if you want GIS map work done, let us know. If you need anything at all, we're here to help.
Have a great rest of your week, everybody.